back to the channel. It's Billy again with another Awaken Chaos Era video. This video here is going to be going over the factions. So essentially we're going to be doing an 8-part series talking about each faction, talking about the heroes in those factions, and kind of talking about some of the skills and stats, talk about where that hero may be good in the game. If you could please drop a follow, subscribe, comment, like, all the stuff you do on YouTube, I'd really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and check out the video. Welcome to another Awaken Chaos Era video. Let's get into it. So today, in this video, we're working through our first of the 8 factions, taking a look at the different heroes, their skills, their stats, and kind of talking about who's good, who's not so good, where we might be able to use them, and how the skills, or what are they called in this game? Abilities are a little different than what we're typically used to in most of these games. So most of these games, your first skill is normally like a increased speed in arena, or increased attack in all areas, or increased defense in dungeons, that sort of thing. These are called traits, and the traits can either be a buff, it can be a debuff, it can be increased stats. There's a number of different things that they can be. The traits are available for elite heroes and up, so elite, epic, and legendary. So our trait here on Urion, attacks by a character affected by light stamp grant healing. Then over here on the left side, it tells us what exactly light stamp is. It reduces damage dealt by this character. So essentially, light stamp reduces damage and grants healing. So whenever this is placed on one of the enemies, damage mitigation and healing to whoever they attack. Typically, there's 2 different traits, a basic trait and then an ascended trait. Normally the extended trait is better in some way, but it seems like the wording here is the same. And this game is in beta, so we're going to run into some issues like that. So when we see that, we just send it to the devs and they fix it. Also, Urion does have the highest attack out of all of the heroes in this faction. So we're going to look at his first skill here. Deals 80% damage to an enemy target and applies light stamp for 3 turns. Goes to a 100% when it's leveled up completely. So we get light stamp on first. If we look at the second one here, deals 70% damage to an enemy target and doubles and renews all debuffs and light stamp stacks upon the target. So essentially he's stacking more light stamps and then adding on to the debuffs that are already on the enemy. So that is super helpful. Goes up to 100%. And then looking at our ultimate skill here, deals 90% damage to all enemy forces, so up to 120 once it's fully maxed out. This attack deals bonus damage based on the number of light stamp debuffs on each target. And it goes down to a 3-turn cooldown. So essentially, this hero would be really good in a boss or somewhere where you're attacking the same enemy multiple times to stack more of the light stamps and to continue to extend debuffs that are on there. So definitely somebody worth investing in if you get him. And like I said, probably one of the better areas is the different dungeons. So looking at Lydia, our next legendary here, she actually has the highest crit rate at 10%. Typically it's like 6 or 8, depending on the level of the champion hero. Excuse me. When we look at her ability here, grants a 10% dodge plus an additional 10% dodge if the caster has less than 50%. As we see here, this is worded the way it should be. Grants 15% dodge plus an additional 15% dodge if the caster has less than 50% health. I could tell you she is a pain to deal with. There's been some times where she dodged like 4 or 5 attacks in a row on me, and it was absolutely aggravating. So looking at her A1, deals 80% damage, scales up to 100, and applies accuracy down. So the last A2 that we had was a special. This one's a passive. So sometimes it's a special, which is a regular move. that they can attack with. Sometimes it's a passive, which is always active. The caster counterattacks following any successful dodge, dealing 80% damage and granting attack up, which may be stacked up to 5 times. This ability may be triggered once per turn. So you have an enemy that attacks her, and it can stack the attack up. A second enemy attacks her, it can stack the attack up again. And then if she dodges, then you've got an 80% up to 100% attack, and then this attack up can go up to 15%. So you got either a 50% up to a 75% that this can potentially stack up to. So that is a whole lot of extra damage that she can do. And then if we look at her ultimate skill, 160% damage to an enemy target, which scales up to 200, and steals health equal to 50% of the damage dealt in this attack. So if this is maxed out at 200%, plus you get her attack rating up a good bit, this is going to do a whole lot of healing. And then you can get it down to a 2-turn cooldown. So I have not had experience with either of these two, but I have spoken to people who have, and both of them have agreed that they are definitely good heroes to have. So moving down to the epics, we have Jacob here. I would say he is one of the top, probably in the top handful of epics that are available. He's got a couple skills that are really good. Jacob actually has the highest speed in the faction at 127. He essentially makes himself stealth at the first round, and if it's ascended, permanently is stealth, which means he cannot be targeted unless he's the only target left, and it can't be removed. So that within itself is awesome. Then we look at deals 50% damage to an enemy with a 50% chance to apply intrigue. Grants this character 1 energy. So every time he attacks, he gets 1 energy. And I'll explain that a little bit in a minute. He reduces defense on the attack, and this scales up a good bit. The damage reduction scales up, the chance to trigger goes up to 100%, and then he does an additional 10% damage. So a lot of stuff going on here. His passive here adds the caster's basic pincer attack to the basic ability of a random ally every round. So I will tell you, after using him, it doesn't happen every round. But essentially what this means is when somebody else on your team attacks, he has the chance to attack with his first skill. I've seen it. I've gone like 2 turns in a row without him attacking. And then I've seen him attack 2 rounds in a row after that. So I don't know what causes it to trigger, but technically it's supposed to happen every round. Which that within itself allows him to deal more damage. So 1, he's going to make himself not be able to attack. 2, he collects energy. 3, he goes additionally, so in like an ally attack. And then this one here, the caster expends all energy to enter crazy mode. And then we see right here, crazy mode is each use of this ability grants a bonus to the caster's attack rating. The caster receives 1 bonus turn per 1 energy consumed. The caster exits crazy mode after consuming all bonus movement chances, going down to a 1-turn cooldown, max energy plus 100%. So essentially what this does is every time he goes, so when he goes on his own, when he goes as part of his pincer, he gains 1 energy. And then when you use a skill, however many energies he has gained, he will use them. I have seen him stack up 6 attacks in a row before because of the amount of energy that he has kept. So he has definitely got a very unique kit. Again, somewhere you'd want to have multiple hits on a single unit. I've noticed that the buffs and stuff like that carry over to multiple rounds. So if you go throughout, each round and only doing the A1, then you get to the end and use this, you'll have a bunch of attacks all built up. His attack isn't super high, but you can definitely get it up there. I would say definitely a unit worth investing in when I've used him. his passive is hit or miss, but his stacks is crazy. Looking at Thomas, um, grants the caster a 50% chance of applying a stun for one turn after each attack if the caster has over 50% health remaining. If the caster has under 50% health remaining, then the caster's attack deals additional damage equal to 2%. Then that scales up to 30 and 5%. My problem with this is the chances are too low. If this was like maybe 25 and this was 50 or something like that, then I could see, maybe it would be worth investing in. But that alone, in my opinion, isn't really worth it. And then if you look at his skills, 70% damage to an enemy with a 50% chance of removing a buff. You would want this to land, and primarily the debuff removal. Looking at his passive, grants the caster a 50% chance of dealing a counterattack, dealing 60% damage upon an ally taking damage. Again, 50%. I mean, I don't. If one of these was like plus 15% chance of dealing counterattack or something like that, it might be a little more beneficial. But you have a 50% chance. Deals 106% damage to an enemy and applies defense down for 2 turns. So for me, these aren't really. I mean, it's good that this is going to land. It's not a percent chance. But with these here being the percentages that they are, same thing with this, a 50% chance. I'm not a huge fan of these. If they're a little bit higher, maybe, but I wouldn't work on investing him. Andre here, looking at him, he's got the highest defense in this faction. So this is the only skill that's really any good for him. The crit damage taken by yourself and all allies is decreased by 15 or 30%. He reduces the crit damage, which I guess that would be helpful for a boss for 3 turns, as long as the boss didn't have a block debuffs, which a lot of them do right from the get-go. This has a water stamp on here. I've tried him. I've used him several times. I don't see him landing that water stamp, so I don't know exactly why that's there. So this just looks like he deals 115% damage, then an extra 45 on top of that, and then dispels 1 buff. So he can cleanse 1 buff as long as it's not a undispellable, which a lot of these buffs are. And then deals 140% damage to an enemy target and applies stun for 1 turn. You can't stun a boss. So I just don't think he has a good enough kit to utilize for a boss or to utilize in like arena or anything like that. His trait is the only thing that's really any good, but that's about it. So I wouldn't recommend investing in him. William here, highest HP in the faction. Absolutely 100% recommend investing into him if you get him. When I got him, he helped me progress significantly further in my game, whether it be arena or adventure or dungeons. Everything he offers is valuable. So increases damage from the caster and allies' basic abilities by 30 and then up to 50%. Just right off the bat, gives you more damage. Attack an enemy for 30% damage, and a random ally pincer attacks the target. So if you have an ally who has a pincer skill, it will attack when he attacks. So if you've got somebody who does that, super helpful. So he increases attack, brings more units to attack with you, applies defense up and for 2 turns and counter for 1 turn. And then when you level it up, his defense up is by 3 turns with a 2-turn cooldown. And then his last skill deals 70% damage to all enemies and dispels all controlled debuffs. So if you're frozen, if you're stunned, if you've got any of that, he cleanses it. It's an AoE. I mean, yeah, it's only 100% damage, so the damage output is not a whole lot. But everything else that he offers in his kit is fantastic. He would be borderline legendary. He is so good. So definitely William is who I would say would be worth investing in. Natalia here, The caster's abilities can affect another target if the caster is under any buffs. Then the caster's abilities can affect 2 other targets if the caster is affected by any buffs. So if the caster has buffs, then she can attack multiple units. Applies 70% damage to the enemy target plus a 30% chance of stealing a buff. Kind of low here. Not really impressed with that. Grants immunity to debuffs to an ally for 2 turns plus attack up for 3 turns. If that was AoE, this would be amazing. Deals 140% damage to the target plus 10% bonus damage per buff affecting the caster. So essentially what this kit is telling you is use this skill on yourself and then use this skill here. So you would want a couple other units that would also bring some additional buffs. Like there's a Imperial Shield Soldier that we'll discuss in the commons that grants defense up. So you've got defense up, immunity debuffs, attack up, and if you can get at least one more, you'll do more damage. So it just depends on how many debuffs you can get stacked on her. I mean, that's about the only thing. If this was AoE, I would say absolutely focus on her. This is kind of wishy-washy. Not a really high enough chance of stealing a buff. So for me, not really a build. If you can get enough units to debuff and stack a whole lot of attack, you're looking at 200% attack plus whatever, or 10% for the additional. So you can potentially get 250, 260. Then that would be a whole lot of damage. She's iffy. She's a maybe. Depends on what heroes you have with her. Now we're with the elite. Let's see, plus 10 attack, plus 20 attack. So we're going to see that these are going to start to get more basic. Deals 80% damage to an enemy with a 30% chance of applying crit down on the target for 1 turn, or crit down duration extended by 1 turn, so you'll have 2. Special grants defense up and dodge up to the caster, so that's only on himself, so it doesn't allow you to cast it on anybody else. And it deals 200% damage up to 206% damage to an enemy, and links the caster and the target with mocking for 3 turns. So essentially what this does is it makes him only allowed to use his A1. Not a fan of this skill at all. Not a fan of this kit, so he would be somebody who I would say don't really worry about. Dulov, again, basic attack up. Deals 90% damage to an enemy and applies crit up for 1 turn, so he gives himself some additional crit for up to 3 turns. Criticals grant a bonus turn, so if you get his crit high enough, he will go again, but it will only trigger once per 2 turns, which if you level it up, it'll be once per turn. So this skill here is a little weird, and I don't know if it's supposed to do this or not. So you can enter defensive mode, during which all abilities are unavailable, and applies a counter. So essentially, he doesn't do anything, and he just counters. Okay? But when it comes back around, you can go back into offensive mode, which gets rid of all this. So his kit is weird. Not really a huge fan of it, to be honest. I mean, you could potentially do more damage by getting multiple turns, but his skills aren't really that high, so wouldn't say working on him at all. Abbott here does additional attack. Deals 60% damage to an enemy with a 30% chance of applying light stamp on the target for 3 turns. So this is somebody who would pair very well with Urion. Heals the caster and all allies for 120% of the caster's attack while dispelling 1 debuff from the target. So, and then it goes an additional 30%, so 150% of the caster's attack on a 2-turn cooldown. So this is definitely something good. There's not a whole lot of healers, so until you can get somebody who's better, like a legendary healer, which there are 2 in the game, there are a couple elite or epic healers. I would say with somebody that you could potentially use as an early game healer, He also grants a shield to a unit on the caster's side with strength equal to 50% of their lost heal for 3 turns. The stipulations of the shield are kind of weird, but then he heals the ally for 260% of the caster's attack. Um, uh, it's and then an additional 90% healing, so he can heal a lot. Like, what's that? 350% healing that he can do on a 4-turn cooldown. Plus, he does 150% healing here. So he definitely has a lot of heals, but it's all based on attack. So as you see, his attack is not very high, so you're going to want to stack all kinds of attack on him. So I wouldn't recommend, if you don't have any other healing options, I'd say you could potentially go with him as a healer. But beyond that, if you end up getting a better healer, then I would say he drops off into the mid-game part of it. Down into the rares, to be honest, none of these are really any good. We see we've lost our trait. 100% damage, 50% chance to speed down, 150 damage to an enemy and applies attack up, and then deals 200% damage to an enemy target and applies speed down. I mean, so he's got some buffs and debuffs. Speed down 2, which is 20%, and 15% attack up, but none of it's AoE, and he only buffs himself. So I wouldn't say really worth focusing on. Earth Mage, 100% damage to an enemy target. If it's water aligned, then this attack deals 20% more damage, plus 10 precision. Deals 120% damage to all enemies, and a 50% chance to apply. Cannot be hardened on the target for 2 turns. Cannot be hardened is it will not be affected by the subsequent strengthening effect. So he would be beneficial in like the water dungeon for water skills and stuff like that. I wouldn't say you wouldn't use him. He would probably fall off mid-game as well. But with his third skill here, an AoE preventing buffs for 2 turns, I would say that would be pretty helpful. But you would definitely need to give him a lot of stats to make him worthwhile. So he could be a maybe based on this and then the additional damage there. Looking at the Fire Mage, same thing, wood aligned, additional precision, which is accuracy, and then he basically deals 150% damage to an enemy and applies skill ineffective for 2 turns, which means the skill is invalidated. So I guess it's a skill that can't be used. The way that's worded is kind of weird. Wouldn't say he would be worth building at all, to be honest. Spies. So 50% chance of applying a poison for 3 turns. 50% chance to defense down for 2 turns. And then 200% damage to an enemy and applies dodge up. I mean, he's got an A1 poison, but it's only a 50% chance, so that's iffy. Water Mage, here's another one that falls into the maybe category for maybe a fire dungeon. 20% for fire damage, more accuracy. And then he has the AoE attack again, but he lands 50% chance of laying untreatable on target for 2 turns, so essentially means they can't heal. So that could be beneficial, but it's iffy. And then when you get down to the commons, none of these are really worth anything except for this dude right here. This skill is a plus 30% defense for 3 turns. That is super helpful. So if you pull him early game, you can use him to help you last a little bit longer. But apart from that, that's about it. The rest of these are just single attacks. Their skills are super low, so I would say really not worth investing in, apart from potentially this guy here. The rest of them is just going to be food. So that is our guide through our Holy Light Empire faction list. Hopefully that was informative to you. Hopefully I gave you some new information. If you could drop a like, drop a follow, drop a subscribe, all that good stuff that you do when you watch YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video.